Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to... This is actually Scryfall. Um, with the release of Phyrexia All We Won right around the corner and the full set preview out at this point, I figured it would probably be time to put in my 2 cents on, what the cards that Phyrexia All We Won is bringing to the game will do. I will be looking at these cards from just a general perspective. If something I think is going to be a standout in limited, I'll call it out. If it's going to be a standout in constructed, I'll definitely call it out. But yeah, it's sort of a perspective of looking at these things from all different angles. So not necessarily one or the other. So without any further ado, I think we're just going to get started here, and we're starting with white, ordered by mana value. That's what we're doing. So we start off here with Crawling Chorus. Crawling Chorus, a 1 mana, 1/1 Phyrexian Horror with Toxic 1. When it dies, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1. This creature can block. So these mites are going to be everywhere. Yeah, this seems like a sort of a minor piece in limited for a aggressive white strategy. Not much really to say about this. We've seen designs like this 100 times. Typically, the tokens are not as complex as the mites, and we'll have to see how much of an impact Toxic has for an aggressive strategy like this. We're going to move into the next card here, the Sinew Dancer. It is a 1 mana, 1/1 Phyrexian Soldier. Soldier is a relevant creature type. I don't think this will see play in Soldiers because the rest of the Soldier package doesn't really fit with what the rest of this card does, which I'm going to get into now, which is you can pay 4 and tap it to tap target creature. That's a decent ability in limited. This is definitely a limited card, right? So, and then you have Corrupted, which is you can only activate this ability if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters. Pay a white, tap this, tap target creature. That's very solid for an aggressive white strategy based around Toxic, or that has some way of reliably getting 3 poison counters on an opponent. The question here becomes, how reliable is it to get 3 poison counters on an opponent? And I would say that it's probably a little trickier than you might think. Just because there's not a lot of... Toxic is significantly worse than previous iterations of poison, except for poisonous. I mean, it basically is poisonous, except it's not a trigger, I think is the difference. I'm not 100% on that, but it's essentially poisonous, which means that it's missing a couple of key components that made Infect very brutal. Most importantly, it doesn't scale with the power of the creature. It scales based on the toxic number, so significantly worse in that respect. And then on top of that, it does not give creatures that are dealt damage by this creature -1/-1 counters, so it does not shrink them, and that is also another reason why it is significantly less brutal. And it doesn't really help your stuff get through, so it's questionable as to whether or not that's going to be a reasonable ask to get 3 poison counters on an opponent. Right? This is definitely a card you're only going to be playing in decks that can reliably get those 3 poison counters very early. But then it's quite good. Like, it's really good. Next up, we have a rare Skrelv Defector Might. 1 mana, 1/1 legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Might. Toxic 1, can't block. Phyrexian White and tap it. Choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. Effectively, in some ways, very similar, trying to be a sort of protection effect, a sort of Mother of Runes style effect. This card is very good. Can't block on this card is irrelevant. Like, you don't want to block. With this kind, with a Mother of Runes or a Giver of Runes or something like that, the ability costing 2 life, because who actually pays mana for this type of effect? Like, you almost never pay mana. If you can just pay life, most often you will just pay life. This card is very strong, particularly in decks like Hammer Time, because Urza's Saga can find your Mother of Runes style effect now. It's more vulnerable than like what they have right now, which is Giver of Runes. But being able to be found off of Urza's Saga and then pumping up tokens off of Urza's Saga makes this very, very nasty. The Toxic is kind of like an afterthought. But by and large, it's there. Obviously, in Limited, this is also very, very solid. In that sense, in Limited, the Toxic is actually going to be the more sort of relevant component of this card. The fact that it gives Toxic to the thing it protects. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. Like, it's a good card. Just look at like what it's mimicking. It's mimicking Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes, which are played in like Modern, so, or were played in Modern. So that's a good card. Next up, we have Swooping Lookout. This is a 1 mana 1/2 Phyrexian construct with flying and vigilance. This card is weird. It's weird. I have taken a bit of a sneak peek ahead, and I think this is sort of a part of a limited archetype wherein you're playing like a blue-white or a mono-white flying circus or aggressive strategy. Like a very aggressive strategy. I don't know that this stat line really doesn't excite me. It's a very interesting card. I think it's only ever going to see play in Limited, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't know that it's really a solid pick unless you are really slanting towards that aggressive flying strategy. Next up, we have Zealot's Conviction. This is a 1 mana white aura with flash. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. Corrupted. Enchanted creature gets an additional +1/+0 and first strike. Wow, I can't speak. Again, this is playing into that aggressive, toxic strategy where you're very much not... You're not so much looking for poison to kill your opponent. You're looking to get it on them so that you can have your corrupted stuff pay off and then just kill them with regular damage. I haven't seen a lot of evasive toxic, so that's kind of questionable as to whether that's going to be good, right? I'm not thinking that's going to be super reliable. But we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get further into stuff. So, next up we have Bladed Ambassador. This is a 2-mana, 3/1 Phyrexian Soldier. Enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it, and you can pay 1 and remove an oil counter. It gains indestructible until end of turn. This is in the vein of cards like Adanto Vanguard. Obviously, like, the one-time activation here is very not good. There are some, like, proliferate synergies, but those are typically, like, not white adjacent. Like, yes, you can proliferate this, but I would not count on it. I would generally evaluate this card such as it is as having a single activation for indestructible. On top of that, your opponent kind of knows how many times you can activate this and when you can activate it. It also costs mana to activate. It's not just remove the counter, so that's kind of difficult. I don't like this card. I think this card is not good. Like, obviously it's an aggressive stat line, and if you're just in the market for an aggressive 3/1, that's fine. Like, it does what it says on the tin, but it's not nearly as powerful as perhaps some of its predecessors. Complete Devotion, 2 mana, instant. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If that creature has toxic, draw a card. This is again playing into that aggressive toxic strategy. Like, it's a nice little trick. If you've got some toxic stuff, it's very good because drawing a card is very good, particularly in limited. So again, like, this is all, for the most part, like, most of these cards have been limited impact cards. The only thing, so I think that's sort of the focus going forward is how's it going to perform in limited, and then if it's going to perform well in constructed, I'll call that out. So this looks like a decent trick in limited if you're playing that aggressive toxic deck. Next up, we have Duelist of Deep Faith. A 2 mana, 2/2 Phyrexian Soldier with Toxic 1. As long as it's your turn, Duelist of Deep Faith has First Strike. Again, same plan. Aggressive toxic deck. Kind of a white thing. This is the kind of card that's going to help you push through those initial poison counters, because having First Strike makes it pretty difficult to block in the early turns. We've only seen one thing which can potentially block this profitably so far, and that's Bladed Ambassador, and even that, it's taking this thing's one immortality token, indestructibility token off of it. So, yeah, this card I think is pretty solid, like, in that aggressive deck. Next up, we have Incisor Glider, a 2 mana, 1/3 artifact creature, Phyrexian construct with flying and corrupted. Whenever it attacks, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Wow! Wow! Yeah. That is kind of a heater. So if you, it's not other creatures you control, it's creatures you control. So if you can get 3 poison counters on an opponent, this thing is a 2 mana 2/4 on the attack, and it's pumping your team. This is like a huge. Yeah, this is a very. This is exactly playing into that very aggressive, toxic strategy. You're gonna make these mites. You're gonna play, this thing, this Phyrexian Soldier Duelist to Deep Faith, and all of a sudden you're swinging with like just a bunch of big stuff. Now, the one issue is this is not turning on until turn 4 at the earliest. Right, because turn 1, you play like this thing, and they don't block. Turn 2, you play this thing, and they don't block this thing. They don't block both of these for turn 3, and they've got 3 poison counters. Turn 4, and then at that point, so you'd play this on turn 3, and turn 4 you'd be swinging with it. So turn 4 at the earliest, turn 5 or 6 more likely this is turning on. But once this is on, it's very, very good. Infested Flesh Cutter, equipped 2 mana, artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature attacks, create a 1/1 Phyrexian Might with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Okay, that effect is very nice. This equip cost is awful. This equip cost is terrible. Like, that's... Yeah. Unless there's ways to, like, snap this onto something, that's a prohibitive equip cost. Like, you don't want your equip cost to be more than 2, really. Next up... Yeah, I really don't. Like, I think unless there's serious equipment payoffs, then this is not great. Next up, we have Jawbone Duelist. This is a 2 mana, 1/1 Phyrexian Soldier with Double Strike and Toxic 1. This card is very nice. Yeah, Double Strike's a very powerful keyword. If you can pump this up with, like the trick that we saw earlier, or maybe the Flesh Cutter, this gets to be very dangerous, like a very dangerous threat very, very quickly. Again, aggressive card. This is a soldier, which could be like maybe standard relevant. I don't know that it's necessarily going to see play over some of the other stuff that's in there already, though, in like a Soldiers deck already. I think Soldiers is already so well tuned and very powerful. Next up, we have Kemba, Ka Enduring. 2 mana, 2/2 Cat Cleric, Legendary. This is a rare, so you're not going to be seeing all that often in Limited. Whenever Kemba, Ka Enduring or another cat enters the battlefield under your control, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to that creature. Equipped creatures you control get +1/+1. Pay 5, that is 3 and 2 white. Create a 2/2 white cat creature token. And important to note, that will trigger Kemba. This card is quite nice as a build around. If you get this card early, it'll be nice to have some equipment so that you can, like, maybe just stick equipment on the battlefield and slap him on Kemba when he comes in. Throw out some cats and strap your equipment to him for free. The cost of the equip is kind of baked into that activated ability. and it's a little overcosted as well. So effectively, the equip cost is assumed to sort of be the same as what infested flesh cutter's equip cost is. Maybe a little less, maybe like one less. You know, it's close because you would really only want to pay like 2 mana for a 2/2. So strapping the equipment to it kind of has to be worth. In limited, though, having a mana sink is pretty good. So this card is probably very solid in limited. You still really want to build around it. Because like a 2 mana 2/2 that makes more 2/2s is not good enough on its own. You really kind of have to. Anyway, moving on. Mandible Justicar. It is a 2 mana, 2/1 artifact creature, Phyrexian Cleric, lifelink, and whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Mandible Justicar gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This card is meh. Meh. Aggressive, lifelinker. It's meh. Next up, we have Norn's Wellspring. It is a 2 mana rare artifact. Whenever a creature you control dies, scry 1 and put an oil counter on Norn's Wellspring. Pay 1, remove 2 oil counters from Norn's Wellspring, draw a card. This is a nice card. This is like an Aristocrats style card, though, and I don't know that that's necessarily an archetype that's supported in limited. It may very well be. If it is, it's probably black-white. So there have been some stuff that has like death triggers, and there's a lot of ways to make these might. There's a couple of ways to make might tokens. So we'll see as we go through these spoilers whether or not this card is supported beyond that. Obviously, draw card's very good, but having to have at least 2 creatures die, unless you're doing some proliferate stuff, which is, again, I think pretty unlikely in a part white deck. Yeah. So it's interesting. We'll have to see if there's proliferate payoffs in like white adjacent stuff that are significant enough to make this into like, okay, you get a counter on there, and then you just start proliferating up, and you draw a counter every other turn. Or you draw a card every other turn or something, if you're proliferating every turn. Next up, we have Ossification. It is a 2 mana enchantment aura. Enchant basic land you control. When Ossification enters the battlefield, exile target creature planeswalker and opponent controls until Ossification leaves the battlefield. This is a Chain to the Rock style effect. Yeah, it's a Chain to the Rocks style Oblivion Ring. I don't know that it being Chain to the Rocks style is gonna be relevant. There would have to be LD in the set. That's more accessible than enchantment removal. Or more broadly applicable than enchantment removal. We have seen there are lands in this set, like spheres and stuff, that do stuff. So that may be... It may be the case that there is some LD. I can't recall off the top of my head anything like that. Other than that, solid removal spell, right? 2 mana, get rid of anything is very solid. It being attached to a land you control, questionable. Next up, we have Planar Disruption. This is a 2 mana enchantment aura. Enchant artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. Okay, we have another 2 mana removal spell. Again, quite solid in this limited environment. So important to note that this does not turn off static abilities. It turns off attacking, blocking, and triggered abilities. Yeah. It does not turn off triggered abilities. It turns off activated abilities. My bad. Permanent can't attack, block, or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. It means you throw this on a Norn's Wellspring, they're no longer drawing cards, but they will still get the oil counters and scries. So kind of an important distinction there. We haven't seen a ton of creatures with activated abilities, or with relevant statics, I should say. Not activated. I keep getting myself confused on that, so please forgive me. With hugely impactful statics. Now, in Standard, we have Shieldred and things of that nature, so there are a lot of relevant statics. Or a fair number, at least. So this is probably not the removal spell you want to be going for in Standard. It's a pacifism style effect, which is like pacifism arrest style effect. It's just not the sort of removal you want when you have things like Ossification, Oblivion Rings, and things of that nature. So, yeah, solid removal spell in limited though. Next up, we have Resistance Reunited. This is a 2-mana instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Equipped creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Okay, so again, this is like an equipment payoff card. This is I think this is significantly worse than the other trick that we saw, the Phyrexian one. That's +2/+2 and draw a card if the creature's toxic. Yeah, it's nice that they get indestructible, which means they are going to, instead of trade, just eat whatever they're being blocked by. That's nice. You're going to use this in combat. And it's also nice that you can use this as a protection spell against removal. And you don't have to target the thing they're trying to remove. I'm not sure that that's good or not. I guess you will always get the +2/+2. No, because if they have double removal spell, it's just, yeah. It's sort of an interesting thing that you can target something that isn't equipped with this and give your equipped things indestructible in response to a removal, is all I'm saying here. We'll have to see if the rest of the equipment has like reasonable equipped costs or reasonable ways to be equipped. Next up, we have, oh look, is that Bitter Blossom? Kind of looks like Bitter Blossom. I guess the creatures don't have flying, but it kind of looks like Bitter Blossom, doesn't it? Yeah, so definitely a new iteration on the Bitter Blossom line of enchantments. We have at the beginning of your upkeep is Skrelv's Hive, 2-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. Corrupted, as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. That's very nice because once you get 3 poison counters on your opponent, you can effectively use the mites to offset the life loss from Skrelv's Hive. This is a very solid card. I think this card is going to see play in a lot of places. So in limited, the corrupted ability matters. In constructed, just having an endless source of 1/1s is very, very nice for decks that want tokens on the battlefield. For example, like a creativity style deck would very much like this. Like a white tokens deck kind of wants this. where you could run it alongside cards like Wedding Announcement. There's another card in this set that this really plays very nicely with as well, which duplicates the number of tokens, or the number of tokens you get when you get a token. So that's very nice. I like this card a lot. I think it's going to be very hard to beat this card, right? It's just an endless source of tokens. And even just like trading 1 life instead of like 4 or 5 life if your opponent's got a more mid-rangey creature that they're swinging with consistently is okay, right? It's not great, but it's nice. Next up, we have Veil of Assimilation. It is a 2-mana artifact. Whenever Veil of Assimilation or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains vigilance until end of turn. This actually, funnily enough, works very nicely with Skrelv's Hive, where you get something with +1, you give something +1/+1 and vigilance until end of turn. So the way this is going to play out in like a limited environment where this is most likely to play is you're going to get, this is going to play as like a trick, a slow, not trick, but slow combat buff that sticks around, and like occasionally when an artifact comes into play, you're going to get a little boost. You could, if you have a way to make a lot of mites at once, a lot of artifact tokens, really turn this into something you can pop off with. And then multiples will also be very nice. Multiple Veil of Assimilations, like if you've got 2 of them in play, that's plus, every time an artifact comes into play, that's +2/+2, split among any number of creatures and vigilance on them. That's pretty sweet. It's probably a bit weaker than some of the other stuff that we've seen already, but it's an interesting card. Next up, we have White Sun's Twilight. This is part of the Sun's Twilight's cycle. It is white, and X. For a sorcery, you gain X life, create X 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature tokens with toxic 1, and this creature can't block. If X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. This is in the vein of, forgive me, I cannot remember the name of the card that just makes a bunch of little soldiers. This is a very solid card. Like in limited, this is gonna sweep and leave you with the only board. Even if and then it works with this like Veil of Assimilation. If you do it for like 4, you can give stuff +4. You can give one of your creatures +4/+4 in vigilance and just smack with it, because it's making a bunch of 1/1s. Constructed wise, maybe it'll see standard play, but beyond that, it's really not efficient enough, right? This is a 7-mana sweeper, so unless that first half of the ability is significant in your format, it's not really going to see any play. Next up, we have Annex Sentry. This is a 3-mana 1/4 artifact creature Phyrexian Cleric. Toxic 1, and when it enters the battlefield, exile target artifact creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or less until Annex Sentry leaves the battlefield. This is a Oblivion Ring creature. We've seen a ton of designs like this. I think Toxic 1 here is flavor text. It could get you to Corrupted if you are playing the aggressive white deck. It is removal, but it is an Oblivion Ring style effect, so not even Oblivion Ring, not even as good as Oblivion Ring in terms of templating, because if they remove this before the trigger resolves, then they get to keep their thing forever. Well, they just get to keep their thing. Forever is obvious, but yeah, they get to keep the thing. Next. So this is a solid card. It definitely, like, very solid and limited. Removal spell, creature, body. 1/4 means that it's somewhat defensive against the aggressive strategies. And then, yeah, so it's a nice piece of removal. Next up, we have a Charge of the Mites. This is a 3-mana instant. Choose one. Deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature or planeswalker, or create 2 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Mite artifact creature tokens with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. This is okay. I mean, it's removal, potentially. This kind of removal is generally pretty dubious in my opinion, because your opponent can 2-for-1 you on this kind of removal by killing one of your creatures. If they kill one of your creatures and you were trying to do exact damage to something, all of a sudden you're short damage on your removal spell, and you're down a creature. Yeah. The instant speed mites could be relevant. Now they can't block, so that's not great for them, but you know, it's there. I don't particularly care for this card. I think it is removal, so you will wind up running it if you have it. And you don't really have other great removal options for that aggressive deck, but you have that aggressive deck in terms of the creature base, in terms of, you know, the other support pieces. Next up, we have Flensing Raptor. This is a 3-mana 2/2 effect creature, Phyrexian bird, with flying and Toxic 1. When it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control with Toxic gets +1/+1 against flying until end of turn. This is pretty poor. This is the kind of card that if you absolutely have to get corrupted, right, it's gonna get you there, because it will pop one of your little mites in the air and get a poison, and probably get a poison counter on your opponent. But a 3-mana 2/2 with flying and Toxic 1, not spectacular. And then the ETB, like, we've seen cards similar to this in the past that are like the Pegasus that is a 3-mana 1/3 that when it attacks, something else gets flying. That's kind of the parallel I would draw here. This is not an attack trigger, this is an ETB trigger. So it's one time, not every time this attacks. I don't think you're going to be killing with poison based on that. Next up, we have Goldwarden's Helm. This is a 3-mana artifact equipment for Mirrodin, so it's a living weapon, but it gets a 2/2 rebel. And then equipped creature gets +0/+1. Wow. This is a 3-mana 2/3 at the end of the day, with equipment synergies. The equip cost on top of that is prohibitive. This is not a good card. I'm sorry. That's a 3-mana 2/3. So don't let it fool you. It's not good. Next up, we have Leonin Lightbringer. This is a 3-mana, 3/2 Cat Rebel with Ward 2, and as long as it's equipped, it gets +1/+1. This card is way better than the previous card. Way better. So, even that said, it's not very good. 3-mana, 3/2, solid stat line. Ward 2, very nice. But that's basically it. Like, the last line is you have to equip it to get this to be crazy good. And what we've seen for equipment thus far have not been effective. Right? Their equip costs are very high, and their effects are pretty small. Next up, we have Vanish into Eternity. This is a 3-mana instant. This spell costs 3 more to cast if it targets a creature. Exile target non-land permanent. This is actually a 6-mana card in Limited most of the time. I would not evaluate this at its 3-mana cost because you more often than not want to target a creature with your removal spell. We haven't seen a ton of permanents that aren't creatures that are like... We've seen a couple that are threats that you might want to get rid of. This could turn off your opponent's equipment synergies and things like that, but I would say this is generally more like a 6-mana removal spell than a 3-mana exile. Next up, we have Against All Odds. This is a 4-mana sorcery. Choose one or both. Exile target artifact or creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. And or return target artifact creature card with mana value... Artifact or creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is pretty nice. We've seen a couple of ETBs. So this makes those better. And then it rebuys things for... It rebuys things from your graveyard. So this is nice in that sense. If your, for example, Annex Sentry gets killed, you can rebuy it with Against All Odds. If your small... I kind of like this card. It's kind of dependent on, looking at the stats and seeing, like, how many things this is going to be able to rebuy, right? And how many ETBs you have. It's really like a blinky card for a low-to-the-ground deck. So, I like it. I probably wouldn't put more than one of these in a limited deck, like, ever. And only in the right deck, right? This is not going in every white deck I'm playing. It's not. But it's pretty solid in the right deck. Next up, we have Hexgold Hoverwings. This is a 4-mana. This is 3 and 1 white for an artifact equipment. For Mirrodin, when this equipment enters the battle, create a 2/2 red rebel creature token, and then attach this to it. Equipped creature has flying. Creatures you control that are equipped get +1/+0. So this is a 4-mana 3/2 flyer with creatures you control that are equipped get +1/+0. This equip cost, again, we see a really prohibitive equip cost here. Here, I'm kind of okay with it because this creatures you control that are equipped get +1/+0 ability is quite nice in an equipment-focused deck. I don't know that the other equipment that we have, like the other equipment we have seen, is not enough to support this. The other equipment payoffs we've seen are not enough to support this. Half the equip cost and expense of this card, but it's probably more supported in another color. Hopefully. Yeah. Next up, we have Indoctrination Attendant. This is a 4 mana, 3 colorless, and 1 white creature, Phyrexian Cleric. It is a 3/4 with Toxic 1, and when it enters the battlefield, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. This is another Blinky card. So we're sort of seeing that the low end of white is really focused on this aggressive toxic strategy, and then the top end is more focused on like this Blinky value-y strategy, right? This is a sort of a slow blink, or not even a slow blink. This is a return to hand, so it's you've got to replay whatever you picked up, which is a downside. And what you're getting for that, you really need that other permanent to have an ETB or or to be pulling it out from under one of like the pacifisms or something like that. So that's where you're at with that one. This is a solid stat line for 4 mana, though. It's a 3/4. So yeah, that's pretty good. It's decent. I wouldn't like be jumping for joy to see this card, but it's a relatively solid card. Next up, we have Might Overseer. This is a 4 mana, 4/2 rare Phyrexian Soldier. So first strike, as long as it's your turn, creature tokens you control get +1/+0 and have first strike, and you can pay 3 and a Phyrexian white to create a 1/1 Might. Yeah, this is definitely like a great top end to a white, to that aggressive white toxic deck. Aggressive, tokens based deck. You make all your mites 2/1s. That's very, very nice. Like if you've assembled a decent sized board of mites, that's great. Next up, we have Mondrak Glory Dominus. This is a 4 mana, 4/4 legendary Phyrexian Horror. This is a mythic rare. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. Pay 1 Phyrexian White, sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures, put an indestructible counter on Mondrak. This card is a bomb in limited. But I'm kind of disappointed in this card. It's just a 4/4. Like, the enabling ability is quite nice. The token doubling. But the 4/4 vanilla body is not crazy relevant. We've seen like it's relevant, obviously, but it's not like super crazy. Interestingly, white we haven't seen any destroy removal yet. We've seen 1 damage spell and a couple of exiles and an arrest. Or yeah. A couple of exiles, or maybe just 1 exile. We haven't seen like damage or destroy below 4 mana, so that indicates to me that this indestructible counter is not... It's relevant in combat more than it is against removal spells, at least from white. Probably in general, though, because white typically has something that's like a destroy target attacking creature or something like that, and we don't see that here. So I'm thinking that this second ability has sort of been considered in the design of the removal packages that are available to the colors. Like, this isn't going to be... This creature can't ever be dealt with. The arrest is going to be pretty bad against the Mondrak, because a lot of what value you're going to be getting is that triggered ability at the start there, so that's something. And this second ability is also quite expensive, sacrificing 2 other artifacts and or creatures. You're sacrificing actual material for this. Now, there are quite a few things that make mites, so if you're sacrificing mites, this is okay. But even then, those are potential threats in the future. So, I'm not, like, super sold on it. Next up, we have Orthodoxy Enforcer. This is a 4-mana, 2/4 Phyrexian Cleric. This is a common. It has Vigilance, and it gets +2/+0 as long as you control 2 or more artifacts. That's my thoughts on this card. Just... no. Alright. Next up, we have Phyrexian Vindicator. This is a quadruple white 5/5 Phyrexian Horror with flying. If damage would be dealt to Phyrexian Vindicator, prevent that damage. When damage is prevented this way, Phyrexian Vindicator deals that much damage to any other target. Behold your inevitable defeat. This is reminiscent of Phyrexian Obliterator. But it's not as good. Combo potential aside, in constructed formats, it's cute. Like, it being a flyer, a 5/5 flyer is obviously, like, very relevant in limited. But that means it's less likely to be able to be blocked. Whereas, like, sometimes with Phyrexian Obliterator, you can get into these, like, situations where your opponent is forced to block, and if they do block, it's just bad anyway. This, they're much less likely to be able to block, and when they do, it's not as bad for them. Because getting shot in the face for 1 or 2 is not nearly as debilitating as sacrificing 1 or 2 permanents. Yeah, that's pretty much... And then maybe you can shoot down some of their creatures. Like, maybe. So, I'm not super high on this card. I think that a 4-mana 5/5 flyer is very nice, but you have to be mono white for that to be super relevant. Which is kind of tough. I think that's kind of tough. I think you play this card if you get it, but it's tough to build a limited deck that's going to necessarily shine in the absence of the Vindicator, if Vindicator is dealt with or what have you. Next up, we have Porcelain Zealot. This is a 4-mana 2/3 creature, Phyrexian Soldier. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If that creature has Toxic instead, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. This is pretty decent. This turns your might tokens into decently sized attackers. We haven't seen a ton of toughness above 4. We've seen some, but that's all at the... Well, actually, we have seen a fair amount. But even still, like, it does turn your mites into a decent attacker. It may be that this is just a little too slow. But it is nice that you can play this first main and get the trigger immediately. So, a decent card. I think it might be a little slow for the format, though. Next up, we have Basilica Shepherd. This is a 5 mana, that is 3 and 2 white. 3/3 Phyrexian angel creature with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless Phyrexian might creature tokens with toxic 1. Yeah, and they can't block. Should just say mites and call it a day at that, but yeah, this is a nice ETB, sort of a card for the blinky, value-y, big white, make tokens thing. This is a solid card. I'm not super thrilled about it, though. Like, it's not the be all end all. It's quite nice, but it's not knocking it out of the park for me. And at 5, I think I would probably prefer something else. Something more impactful, particularly because those tokens can't block. So if you're behind, this is just a 3/3 flyer for 5. Yeah. Next up, we have Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. There's basically nothing I can say about this card that hasn't already been said. But my 2 cents here is essentially it's still not a super resilient card. Like, if your opponent has a removal spell for it, and we've seen removal spells that will get this, it's just gone, and it probably didn't do anything because you got to tap out to... You're probably going to have to tap out to play this. Now, do you play this in your limited deck? Yes. Okay? You just play it. It is what it is. 4/7. Like, it's big toughness, solid power creature. And I'm just thinking now that actually we haven't seen removal that gets this because I'm stupid. I'm gonna go back on that and say the removal in white actually just can't deal with this. The only thing that can is the arrest effect. And even then, that doesn't deal with the static abilities on this creature, which are a large part of why it is so good. Your other removal spells, we've seen one. Okay. We've seen Vanish into Eternity, which is a 6-mana removal spell for this, which means... yeah. Their opponent is not dealing with this in a mana-efficient way. Ossification, this is a triggered ability. This is a permanent. So this does nothing if your opponent is trying to remove your Elesh Norn. What was the other card? The Annex Entry. Again, this is a triggered ability. This is a permanent. Entering the battlefield. Not doing anything. Again, that is just white, so there are probably removal spells in other colors that deal with this, but yeah. Against other white decks, this is very strong. Next up, we have Miran Bardish. This is a 5 mana, sorry. 4 and 1 white artifact equipment for Mirrodin. Enters, create a 2/2 rebel, and attach this to it. Group creature gets +2/+1 and has vigilance. Equip for 4. Wow! These equipment are not good. So if you think about this, this is effectively a 5 mana 4/3 with vigilance that leaves behind a pretty expensive equipment to equip if it dies. We've seen much stronger creatures in general throughout all of the lower mana values. So that is definitely something. I really don't like the equipment here. Really don't like it. It's not very good. Like, the equip costs are way too expensive. Next up, we have Plated Onslaught. This is a 5 mana, 3 and 2 white, instant. Just kidding, it's not 5 mana, it's 2. Affinity for artifacts. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. To be clear, like, what I'm saying there is affinity for artifacts. You're going to have 3 artifacts on the battlefield. This is going to be a 2 mana spell. So this is going to be very solid for that aggressive toxic deck, because you're going to have a couple of mites. You know, you get a couple of mites, you get another creature. Charge, and just smack them. This is a very solid card, provided you can get a couple of mites on the battlefield. Artifact creatures are very common in this set, from what it seems. Like, the tokens being artifacts, and then just having artifact creatures, like, all over the place in addition to that. Means this card is probably, like, if you build properly, this will most likely be 2 mana, which is very good for this effect. Next up, we have 6 mana, Apostle of Invasion. Somebody forgot the invasion, or I think, but that's my opinion. Apostle of Invasion, 6 mana, 4/4, Phyrexian Angel, flying, corrupted as long as opponent has 3 or more poison counters. Apostle of Invasion has Double Strike. Double Strike is very powerful. I think this is a little much for a top end for that toxic, the aggressive toxic deck. It's a big body. It's a big body. But that's a little expensive. Interestingly, we're topping out at 6 here. I don't have a lot of data on other sets, but 6 seems a little low, particularly when there's just 2 cards at 6 mana. Next, and finally, we have the Eternal Wanderer. This is a 6 mana that is 4 and 2 white. Legendary Planeswalker. Enters with 5 loyalty. No more than 1 creature can attack the Eternal Wanderer each combat. That's a static. And then the +1. Exile up to 1 target artifact or creature. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of that player's next end step. That's quite nice. 0 is created 2/2 white samurai creature token with Double Strike. That's also very nice. And -4. For each player, choose a creature that player controls. Each player sacrifices all creatures they control not chosen this way. So this can come down as a board wipe. It can come down and protect itself with a 2/2 double striker. It can also come down and protect itself by tucking away your opponent's biggest threat until the end of their turn. Which means that this can effectively act as an Oblivion Ring for as long as you need it to. Like, they'll have the creature to block. Well, they won't even have it to block, because you can just activate this first main. Yeah. They'll have it on their end step and your draw step. Your beginning phase. Right? And then on top of that, they can't... The static ability means this is going to be so freaking hard to kill. Now, that said, it's not ticking towards a traditional ultimate, right? That -4 ability can happen the turn this comes into play. It's not like growing towards an eventual effect which will win you the game. It just comes down and wins you the game. Yeah, so this is a very strong card, I think. The static ability means that it's basically impossible to deal with. Like, you will always have the opportunity to block for Wanderer. This card seems very strong. Just very, very strong. Because, like I said, you will always have the ability to block for it because only one thing can attack it. And every one of its abilities leaves you with a creature or reduces the number of the most threatening, the ability of your opponent to deal with this. So yeah, that card is very good. Just very good. In limited, I will say. I will put the caveat that is in limited. In constructed, I think that the fact that it's not ticking to a win the game effect, and it's not a sweeper, a full sweeper, is pretty problematic for this card. It's not ticking to something that wins you the game. It's making tokens. It's tucking things away, and it's doing a pseudo sweeper. Right? Everything it does is not quite there for constructed. Maybe standard. Maybe standard playable. I don't play a ton of standard. No, it's probably standard playable. But like if you look at the cards that are available in standard, you have like Farewell and things like that for sweepers. So that's probably better than Wanderer for dealing with, like, if you want to wipe the board. Particularly because it hits like graveyards and artifacts and enchantments too, if you need it to. Where this doesn't. Right? This only deals with creatures. But yeah, I think this basically wins the game if it comes down in limited. Comes down in limited, you -4 it immediately. Your opponent's down to 1 creature. You're up. You have 1 creature. They can attack the Eternal Wanderer, which is at 1 loyalty, but you have a blocker, most likely. And if you don't, you play this card. It comes down and makes a 2/2 double striker. Now they attack it. It's at 5 loyalty, and you can probably block something profitably and leave it, I mean, they can still only attack it with 1 creature, So if they sense out something that can't kill it, which they probably have to, because there's not much that can just one-shot this. Yeah, that's terrifying, actually. There's not much in here that can just one-shot this. Like, the Phyrexian Vindicator is the biggest thing we've seen. And that's the only thing that could, like, one-shot it. But otherwise, there's, like, 3s and 4s. So stuff is quite small here. Which means this is probably living at least one attack. Maybe even just gets ignored, right? Because you can't swarm it. This card is going to be very good. Very, very good. Now, as a rare, it's kind of what I would expect. 6 mana rare. I would expect that to be pretty good. But anyway, that is the last of the white cards. I will, like I said, be splitting this into sections because, man, that took a while. So, hope you enjoyed that, and I know it's a little different than my typical content, so. And if anybody, if you guys have different opinions than me, feel free to share that in the comments. That's, maybe I missed something. Maybe I missed an interaction for Constructed or something like that. I think that it's important to discuss this sort of stuff because no one person knows this game perfectly, right? Nobody knows this game perfectly. Some people know it very, very well, but even they are not perfect. Even they are going to miss calls. And the way for people to perform, better at this game is to, share information. If you share information with people and they share with you, you will both get better. And hopefully get more enjoyment out of the game. So yeah. See you next time with the blue segment of this set review.